They say change, flux is a part of nature, so nothing or no one can be sure. There's no magic calculator calculating the sums of the future. No equations to justify pure. So we go round in circles with no end. Delay is the only action to defend. They can't see the destination. This road has too many bends. People are showing us the answers. Others tell us to step back. We can't understand. Palms up, overturned hands. Cash is passed on, passing the blame on. Wondering how long this will go on. And I'm doing my bit, but truth is I'm getting scared of the news, and truth is I'm not sure what more I can do, because I'm following the advice, but the TV's shouting crisis. How much more time is there in a society with no off switch? So I'm doing my recycling, but they're making more packaging. Cycling to work while others are buying Mercs. Little actions seem futile, checking the labels on my food, trying not to import, while climate refugees move country, trying not to get hurt. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind that it's not us that overstepped the line. We're coming to a point where doing our bit's not enough, and there's got to be someone out there we can trust.
Thank you very much for coming, and welcome to our panel this evening on trust and the environment. So we're going to be discussing how we get our information about climate change and who we trust to give that information. I want to introduce you to our panel this evening, and probably the best person to start with is Tony Birch.
Okay, so I'm Tony Birch from Melbourne, Australia. I'm a writer, primarily a fiction writer, and as the issue of climate change has become more acute to me and my community, I've taken a much stronger attitude that the writing I want to do and the activism I want to do and the conversations I want to have with people are certainly around this issue.
Hi, I'm Claudia Del Pero. I'm a journalist, turned to PR and returned journalist. I worked for several years for WWF, the environmental organization, and now I write about environment, energy and international affairs.
Hi, so my name's Isha. I'm 17 and I'm currently in my second year of A-levels. I got quite interested in climate change and the issues surrounding it because of my school geography lessons, and that led me to join the UK Youth Climate Coalition.
So my name's Tamsin. I started off as a biologist and then I made this transition into geography. I did a PhD in geography. I now work for an organisation called Green Alliance. We work with the three main political parties on climate change, energy policy, resources and the green economy.
So if we could start with a poll. If you trust the people on the screen, if you could just raise your hands. Scientists, that's good. I think, is that nearly every single one of you? Okay. Journalists. Okay, a couple of you have decided. Okay. Academics. Okay. Religious leaders. Wow, okay. Activists. 50-50. Artists. Yeah, thanks very much. Family and friends. Oh, a few of you. Okay. Lastly, I'm looking forward to this. Politicians. Oh, one. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. If we can throw it to our panel then and ask you who you trust to get your information from the environment from. Let's start with you, Isha.
Okay, so predominantly I would say that most of my information comes from school. So from my geography lessons, from the stuff that my teachers tell me, from the stuff that I read in textbooks. And then often things that we do will kind of spark off research. So looking at things online, stuff from journalists, also academic articles and things like that.
Okay. Tamsin?
We're basically a think tank that is using ideas that are coming from lots and different sources in order to influence the political debate. And so therefore we have to navigate this whole host of information that's coming from scientists, coming from experts, coming from business, coming from the public, coming from civil society. I mean, you know, science provides the basic framework for everything that we do, and that sets our understanding of environmental limits, what the impact of rising temperatures, whereas the whole rest of the debate is totally framed in different ways. And I think you have to understand the relationship between interest groups and the outcomes that those interest groups are trying to achieve. We also act as knowledge brokers, so we directly try and hook up politicians with scientists. When a scientist sits with a politician and says, you know, this is what's going to happen in 2050, then it has sort of galvanise a sort of emotional and sort of intellectual investment in the issue that's often not there before.
That's very interesting. Tony, what about you? You write an awful lot about the environment. What are your resources? Where do you look at for it?
Well, it's interesting when you think about artists and activists, because when I was thinking is that they're not people I feel it's about trust or mistrust. It's about, say, with activists, even if their passion gets them to spill over a little bit themselves, I actually admire them. I have great admiration for activists. So it's not about whether I trust or mistrust them. And with artists, it's interesting because as a writer, you need to think about these things. The writers involved with the Weather Stations project, it's the question we're asking ourselves all the time: what difference do we make? What impact do we make? When you think about sort of political humanism, for want of a better term, what these artists are doing, even the ones who aren't engaging in issues of weather, they're talking about the values of the world we live in, the values of community, the values of individuals.
A few years ago I saw a speech by Harry Belafonte, and one of the things he said was that art is the gateway to truth. And that's how other people connect with what's going on. It's by how artists represent it. And I always think that's a very interesting way to look at it.
And on the issue of politics, I think it's very interesting if you can sit a politician down individually, get him out of the party room and get him away from the party whip and the number crunchers. I'm sure that individually there are many politicians who have very clear and strong views. Once they get into that party situation, and it's very difficult for an individual politician to break out from the party line and to say what they really want to say, and I think it's a shame.
Now, Claudia, you are a journalist. Only some of the people put their hands up for journalists, so I don't know if we can trust anything you're about to say. But where do you get... You're writing articles that are going out into the world. Where are you collating your information from? What are your trusted sources for that?
In general, I would do research and get in some data. So I guess the main reference is always the science. And then as a journalist, you would go out and try to talk to all the people who are involved in the debate and trying to listen to as many different opinions as possible.
So you still do investigative journalism,
kind of,
which is not so prevalent as it used to be. But so you're getting it from all the people that are involved.
Yeah. Okay. Trying to have like a maximum of different opinions and ideas, and then see the story that shapes. I recently wrote an article on climate change communications, and I had an idea at the beginning of the story, but then by talking to many different people, the article, the final result was different. And it's really talking to people who suffer the consequences of climate change. And this is something you don't see much in the media. And at a certain point in a WWF campaign, we brought to Brussels a group of people from different European countries so that they could talk to the politicians from their constituencies about what they were seeing in their own work, in their own profession, the landscape and everything. And that was very powerful, because then gives immediately the idea that climate change is not happening somewhere else or at another time in history. It's really now, and certain people are already affected. And I would like to see more of that.
Yeah, first-hand accounts. I think that's it's definitely a very powerful thing, isn't it? If every single one of you mentioned scientists. How do you know which science to look up? How does that work?
The IPCC is an obvious place to start, because it's a consolidation of the best and latest scientific thinking on the issue. Or the Committee on Climate Change is another place to look.
Again, our national science body has a reputation that's decades old for doing really solid, remarkable science in so many areas. Australian governments and industry have relied heavily on that science and accepted that science. It's only with this issue. It's with the issue of climate change that if you look at CSIRO reports, which would match the IPCC reports, that the governments who take advice from these scientists are suddenly not taking advice from these scientists. So this is a first, and it's remarkably alarming that the first is the first that's the most threatening to our planet.
Yeah. Okay, we're now going to play a short clip.
Climate change will mean more floods and more storms, and that's why we've got to treat it like any other national security issue.
Is there a link, Sir Brian, between the rain that we have seen falling in recent days and global warming?
There's no simple link. We can't say yes or no, this is climate change.
This goes to the audience. The coverage of all the floods, sort of on all the different media outlets, did it change any of your opinions?
A little. The best article I saw was in The Guardian a while ago, and it was basically saying that climate change is making it worse, but so is EU farming policy. It kind of broke it down a lot, whereas the rest of it is just arguments without the facts.
So you think there needs to be more articles like that kind of gives you a background understanding of exactly what happened?
Yeah, definitely. But then you've got the argument that if it's too detailed, it's going to be too boring, and then people aren't going to read it.
And people, is that the case with is there anyone here that thinks, there's too much information that I can't be bothered?
If they probably put a placement ad in sort of Facebook section, people might give it a bit more attention. And the papers, I was thinking, that are going to have enough guts to actually say a lot of the truth, or look at other countries, how they look at climate change. They haven't got, personally, I don't think they've got the guts to actually say other opinions. Because I've been to India a few times in the last few years, and they've got a lot more holistic, a lot more open views. India gets flooding monsoons lots of times a year. I think that UK is alliancing themselves too much with Western economies instead of actually going to speak to Asian economies and actually learning how they've been dealing with these issues for hundreds of years.
There's a really important point being made here that we in the West do think about a future where climate change may impact, where it's a really severe reality for so many people and has been for some time. We have this supposed hypothesis of a future where people will lose their environment or environments will be severely impacted on. Well, for Indigenous people in Australia, that's been a reality for over 200 years. With the arrival of the British, enormous disruption to the natural environment, enormous loss of food crops, of food sources, the disruption to family, the disruption to land. And if someone said, well, what would the impact of climate change look like in Australia, you could do work with Aboriginal communities and say, well, this is not what it looks like, this is what it was.
We're going to move on to part 2 of the panel, and in this bit we're going to be asking what role does trust play in causing us to act about climate change? Why are there so many warnings about climate change and yet they're not being listened to?
I think it's very important to be able to trust somebody or trust some organization or have some kind of reference point. It's a bit of an act of responsibility to do a little bit of research and finding the organization, the people, even the politicians you trust personally, and then support them or even question them. But I think that creates the conditions for action, and it's by not trusting anybody that there is no motivation to act.
So at school they played the video of Leonardo DiCaprio and also spoke about it in assembly, and I've never seen so many kids suddenly interested in climate change because of Leonardo DiCaprio. It is quite annoying that you kind of have to have some figure like that to encourage people to take an interest and be motivated. At the same time, I think it is about getting young people interested that wouldn't necessarily be interested, because at the end of the day, young people are going to be the people that are going to be fighting for it in the future.
So I was going to speak more to the second part of the question, is why aren't these warnings being heeded? It's worth looking at George Marshall. He does a lot of writing on this issue, and there's a whole lot of behavioural and cognitive and psychology which shows why people don't act in the face of climate change. And this is a sense of disempowerment or a lack of agency, but it's a perception that there's no immediate threat. I want to just go back to the politician bit and why aren't they acting? And you saw last week Obama, he came out and said some really important things on climate, about how this is a threat to national security, to global security, to poverty, to economic prosperity. I mean, all of the rhetoric was there. And there are lots of reasons that why he's making those statements now. He couldn't in his first time, he was dealing with healthcare. Climate is probably part of his legacy, or he wants to make it that way. And what the political response has been is, rather than reinvigorating politics, it's been around short-termism, populist and reactionary politics. And in that sort of context, the sort of climate agenda does not fare well at all. But I think there is lots that we can do. I think it exhausts us to sort of find new routes to political renewal, not all politics happens in Westminster. I think the whole devolution agenda means that we can look for political leadership in cities, in other areas where there's lots of exciting things happening on climate. And, you know, there are going to be beneficiaries from the move to low carbon, and it's all about working with those new constituents against to exhort our political leaders to show more ambition.
Tony, do you engage people in it all the time?
I've worked with school groups in Melbourne, in Australia, in Berlin, in Dublin, and yesterday here in London. One of the approaches I take is to say, okay, let's say we're unsure of how the climate will change. Let's think about our place, our street, how we value it, how we value our house, our parents, our community, our street. One of the exercises I do is I ask them to go out and take a photograph of the piece of sky above the house, to look at that photograph and write something about it and say, yeah, I'm working with kids in Melbourne doing the same thing, and their piece of sky is connected to your piece. I show them images of people who've lost their houses through bushfire, which is clearly related to rising temperatures, to say, okay, it's about protecting our communities. Politicians, they promote apathy. They promote inaction. So it's easier for someone in the community to feel, well, we are powerless, or we are disenfranchised, or we don't trust these politicians. And in that sense, the way that I'm working with them, rather than think about the science and trying to get around that, for me it's to them to realise not only their places are important, that they're important, and what they have to say is important.
In the audience, who would you trust to fix environmental issues?
I think it will need to be kind of collective of young people and people who have the passion to stand up and say with politics that we need to change this and we need to fight for what we've got, because soon we might not have it anymore.
In our country, we don't really spend much time giving airtime to frontline communities. When we say frontline, we think about, you know, people in India, for example, who are facing flooding. But we do have communities in this country. You know, we're speaking to some people that were facing the floods in Somerset. If a reporter had actually spent time speaking to these farmers, they would have realised that even though they don't have a scientific background or understand, you know, the full extent of it, if they were like, we know this is linked to climate change. Those are the people that I trust, and if we start putting more people like that in the media or hearing from them, I feel like a lot more people would be engaged.